The test allows us to affirm, they said, with complete objectivity and certitude that both belong to the same blood type, both the flesh and the blood, type AB. It's the same as that of the man of the Shroud of Turin, and the type most characteristic of Middle Eastern populations.
Veni sancte spiritus et emite celitus lucis tuae radium. Veni pater pauperum, venitator lunerum.
Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm so grateful that this room is full. That's awesome. I'm going to get started with the prayer. We'll say a Hail Mary. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. There's chairs up here. Thank you all for coming. My name is Stacy Trasancos, and since October, I've been the executive director of Bishop Strickland's St. Philip Institute of Catechesis and Evangelization. We've got a lot of events and talks and training sessions planned this year. We've got a number of publications we're working on, sacramental preparation, formation, catechist formation. We've got the RCIA book. We are taking care of the Catholic East Texas, both online and in print. So I just take every chance I get to let people know what we're doing, because I think until recently people kind of wondered, what is that institute the bishop talks about all the time? We're doing things, presentations, publications, teaching. This is in line with that. This talk, though, is not a talk I ever would have given. Is this working? No. So I have always, my point I'm trying to make, I've always been a little standoffish when it came to miracles. Like, I studied Father Stanley Yockey, and he said something that I agreed with very much. It only makes sense that there are miracles if there's all this order in the world, which you learn about, and I'm serious, electron orbitals, bonding rules, why atoms do their thing, why electrons do their thing, why molecules do their things, why proteins fold. If there's a God that can structure all of that, certainly, absolutely, it's the most logical conclusion in the world. That God can change things sometimes if he's loving and personal and wants to do things to show us, I'm here. So I thought it's pretty logical that there are miracles. I'm good with miracles. But anytime somebody would talk about miracles and they would be kind of zealous, you know, like, oh, you got to read about this miracle. This is so great. I'm like, dude, you're supposed to already believe in God. You're not supposed to need miracles to believe in God. You're supposed to be confident in your faith. Let me show you chemistry. We'll be good. And it was me, though. I started when recently Dr. Paniagua sent a video about Eucharistic miracles to the bishop. The bishop forwarded it to us at the Institute, and I was kind of like, yeah, I don't know. And then I said, that's one thing my husband loves about me is I'm not afraid to learn new things. And I said, okay, it's time. And I told the bishop, we're going to give a talk about this, which means I had to dive into it. And it was pretty profound. So I'm here giving this talk now because God told me to. And I start logically with these things. What is transubstantiation? I'm not going to say that the Eucharist itself is not a miracle. I'm not going to say that. But technically speaking, the way St. Thomas Aquinas explains it, transubstantiation, and it wasn't just him, he was building on the councils before him, or that was after him, but he was building on things that were already established by the church. Transubstantiation is a word that the theologians way back when gave to the Eucharist alone. It's a change that is unique from any other change. Why? I used to sit kneeling looking at the Eucharist at Mass going, what are the electrons doing? I know that it is now the body and blood of Christ. I believe it. But what nanosecond did it happen and what exactly did happen, because a chemist wants to know at that invisible atomic level what's going on. Nothing changes. The appearances stay the same. If you put it under an electron microscope, the bread still would have the same molecular structure as bread. But I'm like, you mean we just stare at it and nothing happens and we go, it's the body and blood of Christ. Yeah, that's faith. That is the mystery of faith. And so it has this word, transubstantiation. It means the substance changes, but the appearances do not. St. Augustine from the 4th century, St. Aquinas later on in the first part of the Summa, question 105, say that specifically a miracle would be something that we're accustomed to observing that happens different. The electrons would do something different. There would be a visible change. There would be something that happens against the order of nature, that's physical sciences, biological sciences, which we know, we are accustomed to observing. We call that a miracle. If I started floating in the air right now, that would be a miracle. It might happen. So a miracle is called, as the word miracle comes from being full of wonder. So we say lots of things are miracles. It's a miracle when a baby is conceived. It's a miracle when a baby's born. It's a miracle when my kids clean their room. We say lots of things are miracles because we're full of wonder that it happened. But a cause absolutely hidden from all of us, if it's pushing that word as far as you can, which I like to do with words, the miracle is something that there is no explainable cause for it except God. Outside the causes, that's God. And that's what we're talking about with Eucharistic miracles. How are they approved? Well, this is pretty straightforward, but it can get kind of hairy. The local bishop launches an investigation. If one of you saw a Eucharistic miracle or any other kind of miracle, you would tell people, you would need to let the bishop know. The bishop would decide whether to launch an investigation or not. And sometimes in some of these stories I've been studying, the bishop waited 3 years, he waited, he's like, just keep looking at it and see what happens. They didn't launch it right away because we're very careful. The Holy See might take over the investigation. That has happened. An alleged miracle will be observed for a time. It depends. They're trying to answer the question using scientists and anybody who's an expert in whatever that miracle happened to be. Can it be explained by natural phenomena? And then it's declared authentic by the bishop. So if it's declared authentic by the bishop, it's an approved miracle. The ones I'm going to talk about tonight are all approved miracles. We have some books back there, and I'm sorry I didn't bring any for sale. They're just from Amazon. You can order them. But if you want to write down the authors and titles, Dr. Paniagua and I brought our books to show you which ones. But the ones I took this talk from is this book by the Real Presence organization. It's called The Eucharistic Miracles of the World. It is excellent. It's $30 or $40, I forget, but if you're interested in reading the details, which I was, I highly recommend it. The books got pictures, which is good, and all of the pictures in my slides come from the website that goes with this book. These were all put together by a kid who died when he was 15 of leukemia. He had a very strong devotion. I'll get to him. I'll tell you about him in a minute. A very strong devotion to the Eucharistic miracles and other miracles. And he put together all of these things so that they could be printed out and used as exhibits in different parishes. So I have them here. I just want to make sure I credit who put these together. So I'm going to talk about some of these miracles. Let's see if I can put this on now without breaking it. Okay. And I have my book here, so I won't get the details wrong. But I just want to give you, if you don't already know about these, some of you do, what we're talking about in terms of miracles. This one goes back to the 13th century in Italy. And what happened here is, like me, a priest just couldn't get his head around the fact that this was actually the body and blood of Christ during the consecration. There is a picture by Raphael in a fresco in the Vatican Palace. But there was a German priest, and he found it difficult to accept that Christ was actually present in the consecrated host. While celebrating Mass over the tomb of St. Christina, he spoke the words of consecration, and immediately blood started to seep from the consecrated host and trickle over his hands onto the altar. So that you don't really need an electron microscope to know something's going on with the electrons there. The priest tried to hide the blood, but eventually he interrupted the Mass and asked to be taken to Pope Urban IV. The Pope called an investigation, and he commissioned, do y'all know this story? He commissioned St. Thomas Aquinas to compose the Office for the Mass and Liturgy of the Hours to celebrate the most holy body of the Lord, the Corpus Christi. That's where that comes from, that celebration. 1 year later, Pope Urban IV introduced Aquinas' composition, and by means of a papal bull, instituted the Feast of Corpus Christi. So that's one miracle. This one happened in Austria in 1310. I have all my bookmarks here. In this miracle, you can still see it. Again, a priest was seized with doubts during the consecration. Right after the consecration, the wine this time changed into blood and began to boil and overflow out of the chalice. 170 years later, in 1480, the precious blood was still as fresh as though flowing from a wound. The precious blood is preserved intact to this day at the monastery of St. Gorgenberg. You can see it. This one occurred over 7 years. In Italy, in 1273, let's see, I have all these marked. In Italy in 1273, this one cracks me up a little bit. In the town of Lanciano, a woman named Ricciarella, I think I pronounced that right, went to a witch to ask how she could regain the affection of her husband. The witch said, "Go to communion and obtain a consecrated host." Ladies, we all know not to do that, right? There's better ways. On her return home, she put the host in the fire in an earthenware jar with the intention of turning the Blessed Sacrament into powder to put into her husband's food. The host, however, transformed into living flesh. Terrified, Ricciella wrapped the jar and the bloodied host in a tablecloth and buried it under the manure in her husband's stable. Strange events began to take place. Every time her husband's donkey entered, it would genuflect toward the place where the miraculous host was buried. He began to think his wife had put a curse on the donkey. 7 years later, I don't know what happened with their relationship. The woman, tormented by remorse, confessed her terrible sacrilege to the prior of the Augustinian Priory in Lanciano. So this is all recorded. According to the story, the woman in tears began screaming, "I killed God! I killed God!" The priest went, he found the relics intact, and took them away from her. And he showed them to another man, and that man was in mortal sin, and they burned him, because these consecrated hosts are like, "I've had enough of this." But they went on. So the history here, the proof here is that it was recorded by people who were witnesses to it, and by the woman herself. Today, over her house in Lanciano, there is a small chapel. Another one in Italy. This one is called the Holy Cloth Soaked in Blood. According to the annals in this town, I'm going to read it. It was the year 1412. The Camaldolce Abbey of Santa Maria in Bagno, governed by Father Lazarus, who was of Venetian origin, While he was celebrating the divine sacrifice, he mentally experienced by diabolical influence a strong doubt concerning the real presence of Jesus. Then he saw the sacred species of wine overflow the chalice and drip again, similar to the one before, onto the corporal in the form of living blood, and it became soaked. At the sight of such a profound event, his emotion and perturbation of mind were unspeakable. In tears, he turned to the bystanders, confessing his unbelief and relating the miracle which had just happened before his eyes. Now, I liked this one because chemistry is mentioned for the first time. So the other ones, at some point, I'm thinking, yeah, people could have just been making that up because they really wanted to say our town had a miracle, although I don't really think you want to brag about some of these stories. But there's not much to go on but the word of history and what's been written down. And still, I guess you could say that here too. But later on, in 1912, a cardinal celebrated the 500th year anniversary of this miracle. In 1958, another cardinal had a chemical analysis done. So they couldn't do as much then as we can do today. They had an analysis done on the marks on the miraculous corporal at the University of Florence. The analysis confirmed that the stains over 500 years later were blood. And I think those are still there as well. In this one, we have rabbits in Belgium. In this story, a man made a living by stealing sacred objects from churches and selling them in Europe. He stole the chalice with and the ciborium containing 5 consecrated hosts. He said that there was a mysterious force that prevented him from continuing his journey. He tried to get rid of the hosts by throwing them into the river, but every time he did, he was prevented from doing so. On the edge of despair, he went to a nearby field and found a big rabbit and hid the host in her nest. I'm not sure why. He accomplished this without any trouble and calmly returned to his town. When they found out that the hosts were missing, the judge in the town said, I bet it's that guy. And they went and found him, and they got him, and he confessed everything. He was to be immediately hanged and had already climbed the scaffold when, encouraged by the priest to cleanse his soul before dying, he completely confessed his guilt. They suspended his execution and ordered Jan to indicate the exact place where the stolen hosts were left. They went out to the field and found the host arranged in a cross, glowing in the rabbit's nest. See the rabbits looking at him there? So that's that miracle. And a few more. I'll get into more serious ones, but I wanted to give you a taste of all the different kinds of miracles there are. In this one, and you can still see this one today too, in 1604, a Eucharistic miracle took place in Mogoro, Italy. During Mass, 2 men in mortal sin dropped 2 hosts onto the ground. The bishop says, don't receive communion if you're in mortal sin. We're not supposed to do that. These 2 men did, and they dropped the host, and they left imprints in the stone. And the priest tried to wash it off, and he couldn't, and they're still there to this day. That's a picture of them right there. The stone bears the imprint of the host to this day, it says in the book. And now this one that you're all probably familiar with, the miracle at Lanciano. This one dates back earlier than any of the other ones we've covered so far. This one goes back to 750 AD. But I put it here because it was restudied again in 1970. We've seen the picture of the intact flesh that's still there. Everything was visible to the people in attendance. The host turned into flesh, the wine turned into blood, both. The flesh is still intact. the blood divided into 5 unequal parts. So it dried into 5 chunks. The unequal parts, which together, and I would like to see this, they weigh the same as each one does separately. So when they put all the 5 chunks together, they weighed the same on the balance as each chunk did individually. There's no explanation for that. You can calibrate a balance, but if it's still happening, there's not much you can say except that's a miracle. So in 1971, a professor, Dr. Edward Linoli, and he wrote this, I've seen it before, but it's in Italian, so I didn't really understand much of it. He wrote up an analysis. He is the director of the hospital in Arezzo and a professor of anatomy, histology, chemistry, and clinical microscopy. He was asked to carry out a thorough scientific examination of the relics of the miracle, which occurred 12 centuries earlier. He presented a detailed report of these studies. Here they are. The miraculous flesh. So these were some of the samples they gave him. There's some pictures of it down here. So this is the 5 blood chunks that dried, and that's what they saw in the microscope. The miraculous flesh is authentic flesh consisting of muscular striated tissue of the myocardium. That's heart tissue. The miraculous blood is truly blood. They did a chromatographic analysis indicating it is absolute and indisputable, certain. The immunological study shows with certitude that the flesh and the blood are human. They can compare it to other samples. The test allows us to affirm, they said, with complete objectivity and certitude that both belong to the same blood type, both the flesh and the blood, type AB, and it's the same as that of the what? Right. It's the same as that of the man of the Shroud of Turin, and the type most characteristic of Middle Eastern populations. The proteins in the blood have the normal distribution of probably amino acids in the identical percentage as that of the serous proteic chart for normal fresh blood. So 12 centuries later, the blood is still fresh according to chemical analysis. They couldn't find any trace of salt or preservatives, and you could test for that then. It's just the 1970s. They couldn't find any trace of salt or preservatives to have embalmed these samples. And he wrote all of this up, and it was published in a journal. People have asked me before, why don't they make a bigger deal about it? I don't know. For probably the same reason I was afraid to study this as a chemist, because I was afraid of what I might find. That it's like when I converted, God was out there and that was kind of okay, like, oh wow, you made the universe, that's so cool. But then when it was like, God is personal, it was like when your friends get too close to you, you're like, I need my space, don't get so close. I felt a little bit like that, like I don't really want you to know all about me, it was too late, he already does. But I had that feeling, and I think it's like that with the miracles. It's like it can't be, but it's sort of hard to deny. There was also a hoax that was carried out saying that this was all just made up. And they actually got the World Health Organization. I know that organization because I've studied abortion statistics a lot, and this is one of the organizations that sort of pushes abortion in the world. The overpopulation scare and stuff, the false overpopulation scare. The Chief Advisory Board in 1973 appointed a scientific commission to corroborate Linoli's findings. The work lasted 15 months and included 500 different tests. It was verified that the fragments taken from Lanciano could in no way be likened to mummified tissue. They were fresh. As to the nature of the fragment of flesh, the commission declared it to be living tissue because it responded rapidly to all the clinical reactions distinctive of living beings. That means it chemically was acting like living flesh would act, which is very, very different from the way mummified flesh would. I mean, it's totally different chemical behavior, different composition. They said that the flesh and blood, and this is the World Health Organization, was in the same condition one would expect to find flesh and blood taken the same day from a living human, 12 centuries later. Their reply fully corroborated Professor Linotyli's conclusions. The extract summarizing the scientific work of the Medical Commission of the WHO and the UN was published in 1976 in New York and Geneva. They declared that science, aware of its limits, has come to a halt face to face with the impossibility of giving an explanation. So I think that would be a good thing to talk about when we're talking to Protestants in this area, or young people, or anybody. I think it's amazing. This is the picture that you see a lot, that you can still go and see, of the flesh. There are some of the pictures from the microscope. There was adipose tissue, fat tissue. Another miracle in Mexico, Tixtla, Mexico, 2006. So we're up in our time now. In 2006, there was a reddish substance on the consecrated host during the Eucharistic celebration. Now, you'll find still today, I did some research just on the internet, looking up stuff. A lot of people who don't believe this today, I guess they don't know about the studies I was just talking about. They say there's some kind of bacteria or some kind of mold called Serratia marcescens. It's a red. So sometimes if you leave bread in a humid place, there will grow some red fungus-looking stuff. There's several different kinds, and people have said that could be. And there have been miracles that were alleged that turned out to be not blood. They were a fungus or a bacteria, whichever kind it was, growing on the bread. And so people thought that's what this one was too, but it wasn't. They got a doctor, Dr. Ricardo Gomez, so remember his name, Gomez, because he also did studies in another miracle. They asked him to study these consecrated hosts that had turned into blood. His conclusions were, the reddish substance analyzed corresponds to blood in which there are hemoglobin and DNA of human origin. So see, the tests are getting more sophisticated. 2 studies conducted by eminent forensic experts with different methods have shown that the substance originates from the interior, excluding the hypothesis that someone could have applied it from the outside. So when you're doing an analysis scientifically, you want to cover, like St. Thomas does, you want to cover all the objections. Some people had objected that somebody just painted something red on and called it a miracle. They analyzed a cross-section and saw that the way the blood was in the host, that it couldn't have been painted on the outside. If they had painted it on the outside, it would have gone into certain pores. It would have gone into all the pores where they painted it on. But the blood was coming from one place, moving out. So just simple physics there. It wasn't painted on, so they answered that question. The blood, again, is type AB. A microscopic analysis of magnification and penetration reveals that the upper part of the blood was coagulated since 2006, but the underlying internal layers revealed in February of just 2010 the presence of fresh blood. And that's pretty easy to detect, and it's pretty undeniable if you do detect it. Also found were intact white blood cells, red blood cells, and live macrophages absorbing lipids. The tissue in question appears lacerated and contains recovery mechanisms just as a living tissue. So it's not just fresh, it's living. The reason that's important is if you take blood and you just put it there, or if you put it in water, or if you leave it out in the air, those cells don't stay like that. But these were there, and there were white blood cells, as if it were living. They again revealed that the tissue corresponds to heart muscle tissue, the myocardium. And His Eminence Alejo Zavala Castro announced, the event does not have a natural explanation. It does not have a paranormal origin. It is not traceable to manipulation by the enemy. So he declared it a miracle. And then we get to the miracle that started all this here, the Buenos Aires miracle. This one happened a lot. Like, if they say you're not supposed to brag about having Eucharistic miracles because that's usually evidence of some serious doubt there, these people just had it coming and coming and coming. In May 1st of 1992, make sure I get all the steps right here. This is kind of complicated. In May 1st, while putting the Blessed Sacrament away, a Eucharistic minister found some pieces. What are you supposed to do if you find that? Following what the church prescribes, the priest had the pieces put into a vessel of water, because you're supposed to dissolve it. He then placed the vessel of water into the tabernacle to wait for the pieces to dissolve. Several days later, on May 8th, if you can see all this, on May 8th, they discovered that it was red. There was blood. It hadn't only not dissolved, it had turned into blood. The following Sunday, on May 10th, during 2 evening masses, small drops of blood were noticed on the plate where they put the host. They saw 2 drops of blood. And they're like, what, again? And then on July 24th, a Sunday Mass during the children's Mass, when the Eucharistic minister took the pics from the tabernacle, he saw a drop of blood running down the side of it. So they're seeing all these things. A few days later, on August 26th, a Eucharistic minister opened the tabernacle and saw that the host had changed into blood. So they had a number of samples. But they weren't done. This happened in 1992, 1994, and then over here, August 15th, 96, and August 26th, 1996, again, there were 2 pieces that dropped. They put it in water, put it in the tabernacle like you're supposed to do, and it didn't dissolve. It turned to blood again. So they have 2 samples from 1992 to 1996. They have 2 samples. Here's the 2 samples. And this is what, after I first started reading about this, I stared at that for a long time. I'm like, that could be anything. Like, how do you know? Because I hadn't gotten to all these other miracles that I was talking about. This doctor, Dr. Frederick Zugebe, a forensic pathologist, was looking through the microscope, and he said, these are heart tissues undergoing degenerative changes of the myocardium. And these changes are due to the fact that the cells are inflamed, and it is the left ventricle of the heart. So this one in 1996 is what he's looking at. The one from 1992, they didn't give it to him to look at because I guess they couldn't. But they did have a chemist in their congregation analyze it, and she said it's human heart tissue. This is the one that Pope Francis was involved in. So Pope Francis asked them, after he became Pope, to study this miracle. On March 17th, 2006, Pope Francis took this over and decided to study it. He had a number of doctors look at it, but this forensic pathologist, again, Professor Zugebe, was looking at this. Now, I looked up the microscopic view of that bacteria that I was talking about, and it doesn't look like this. So, I mean, that's almost as good as seeing it laying on the table with a microscope. It doesn't look anything like this. So it wasn't that. It was the heart tissue. And I thought, but who is this guy talking about this stuff? So how I got this video, though, let me just tell you. After I got the video from Dr. Paniagua, the bishop went on his trip to Australia in January. And he sends a letter and says, after I was celebrating Mass at this little church outside of Sydney, Australia, this man walks up to me named Ron and says he's got some books about Eucharistic miracles and he's going to send them to me. Would that be okay? And Terry forwarded the message and I was looking at it and like, okay. The books appeared on my desk a few weeks later. They had gotten mailed and I didn't even look at them. I'm still standoffish. I don't know why. I'm just being honest. Like, I'm not quite sure why I was doing that. And I didn't want to look at him. I was just like, it's a little too zealous. I don't know. I picked him up today, literally today, in my office because I was studying about this doctor here. His Wikipedia page says, he's an American expert in forensic medicine. He was the chief medical examiner of Rockland County, New York from 1969 to 2002, kind of a long time. He's one of the United States' most prominent forensic experts, known for his research and books on forensic medicine, as well as his crucifixion and Shroud of Turin studies. But that came after he did this. This changed his life. He's a PhD and a medical doctor, diplomat of the American Board of Pathology and Anatomic Pathology, Forensic Pathology, American Board of Family Practice, American Academy of Forensic Sciences, National Association of Medical Examiners. He had done over 10,000 autopsies. And I'm like, all right, I guess he knows what he's talking about. I'll stop being such a brat about it. This film was filmed by the man who approached the bishop in Australia. And while I was sitting there today going, I just want to see the chemical analysis. I just want to see. I don't want somebody to tell me what they concluded after looking at the data. I want to look at the data because I know how to read the data. And sometimes as a chemist, and that's what you do that's so boring and kind of geeky, sometimes when people say it was human heart tissue, or it was, and they said it had some other things, sometimes you can say that conclusion can be reached a number of ways. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that. It could be interpreted. Like, I was concerned that maybe they were stretching the truth. Maybe they were seeing things a little, maybe they all got together and said, just say it's heart tissue. And I wanted to see it for myself. I guess like a doubting Thomas, I guess. I know I wasn't really doubting. I'm just like, I don't want to trust this guy. I want to see the data for myself. The books that the man that approached the bishop in Australia had been appointed by Pope Francis to be the documentary filmmaker of the miracle that Dr. Paniagua sent the bishop, who sent it to me in December. And so people on 3 different continents are responsible for this talk tonight. Because it turned out those books I wouldn't look at that came from the man in Australia who approached the bishop had the chemical analysis in them. And I looked at them today and I'm like, all right, God. I see what it says there. It said this thing about non-human DNA. And you can say it's a sample from the 1990s. In the 1990s, I know this because I wrote a paper for the National Catholic Bioethics Quarterly just last month, so it's not even a coincidence that I happen to know this today. They couldn't do an analysis of the genetic material in cells more than qualitatively in the 90s. They could only identify certain segments. And so when you say it's non-human DNA, that means it could be anything else but human. That's one conclusion. If you say it's non-human DNA, that's what they say about Neanderthal studies now. They say, well, there's non-human DNA. What they mean is most of it's the same, but these specific places that they could analyze in the 1990s qualitatively aren't there. But there could be a lot of other stuff that's there. It could just be those tags aren't the right ones. Or what these people were saying, it's non-human DNA, meaning that would make sense if it has human cells, non-human DNA, because Christ didn't have a father, a biological body father. And I was like, I don't think so. But I saw the analysis today because I opened the book that happened to be on my desk for why I don't know. And it is not the same as the Neanderthal studies. It's not, what they're saying is everything about it is human DNA, but we can't get a paternal profile. And then I watched this guy, and I'm going to let you listen in his own words.
We had been given custody and the freedom to do any tests that were needed. The first step in having the material identified was pathology testing. And it was New York forensic pathologist Dr. Frederick Zuckerby that was to give the most definitive answer as to what the substance was.
I just want to say, in this film, he doesn't know what he's looking at, okay? They gave him this sample, and this was before he studied the Shroud of Turin and stuff. 10,000 autopsies in his life. He knows what he's talking about. He doesn't know what he's looking at here. They just said, this is my patient's sample.
He was told nothing of the origin of the sample. Looking at it, he had no doubts about what this was and where it had come from.
Heart tissue. There's a inflammatory infiltrate here, but the inflammatory infiltrate is mixed. It's a mixed, it's actually mixed here. In other words, the heart tissue itself is degenerating, is degenerative. In other words, this is what happens sometimes after a heart attack. This is a person that had a heart attack, but it's not immediate. In other words, the person had to have lived a period of time after this for at least a few days, at least after this. Now, there's other things that can cause this type of a item that resembles a heart attack. In automobile accidents, where they get chest crushes and it causes damage to the heart. You get it from a person getting beat up across the chest. You get coronary injuries from that. You get coronary injuries from people who gave CPR incorrectly and a person comes out of it. That area may die off. If, say, the injury hit this area of the heart, right here, that person would probably die because that's a major anterior descending coronary artery, left main, circumflex artery. That would stop bringing oxygen and nutrition to that part of the heart, and that part of the heart will then die. If it was over here, then this part of the heart would die. The rest of the heart would look perfectly fine. You know, I've written over 100 papers in cardiology. I was director of cardiovascular research with the Veterans Hospital. I'm a full fellow in the American College of Cardiology, as well as being a forensic pathologist. And the heart is one area that I know. Yep. This is my business. It's really not too far. It's not too far from the valvular area. I think it actually comes from about right in this area, right in here.
And what's the function of that part of the heart?
That's the left ventricle. That's a major area that pumps the blood to all parts of the body. That's the left ventricle is when all the blood comes back to the heart, and the heart contracts and shoots the blood out to the brain and to all other parts. It has to be shot out through there. The right ventricle only pumps the blood to the lungs to get oxygenated for oxygen purposes.
Yeah.
Now, what's the history?
Now, what's the history? So, you know, the people verifying these, they want to be honest about it. They don't want to call it a miracle if it's not, because that could do great damage to people's souls if you lied about it and got people believing, or even if you were biased about it. And so I do believe they were being as objective as they could. And that man went on then to write, he started studying other miracles and wrote some books about it. But notice what he said. The part where that sample came from is the part of the heart, and I'm just reading, so I'm not quite sure if I'm getting it right. It's the part of the heart that, as they put it, gives life to the whole body. It's the part of the heart, not where it's just pumping the blood to be oxygenated. It's after it's been oxygenated. It's the part of the heart that gives life to the whole body. So it just keeps going. I mean, it's not just heart tissue. It's living. It's not just fresh, it's living. It's not just living, it's in a certain spot. It just goes on and on and on. The last miracle I want to talk about is the most recent one that I found in this book. In Poland. So on this one, it was another one. The host almost dissolved, but with some strange red clots in the center. So they found another host that had fallen. They put it in water and stored it, and again saw that there was blood. They removed the small portion. They put it then on a corporal with the red cross embroidered in the center to keep the host safe. And they locked it in the tabernacle, so they didn't put it in water. Over time, the host in this case then, so it wasn't in water, it fused with the fabric. Only then were two scientists of global fame, specialists in pathological anatomy at the Medical University of Białystok in Poland. They were consulted. They released a declaration on the Eucharistic miracle after their studies. On October 12, 2008, a consecrated host fell from the hands of a priest while he was distributing Holy Communion. He picked it up and placed it in a vessel filled with water. Okay, he did put it in water. After Mass, the vessel was placed in a safe place in the sacristy. On October 19th, a week later, on opening the safe, you could see a red stain on the host that had fallen. With the naked eye, you could see the stain. It looked like blood. 10 days later, on October 29th, the vessel containing the host was transferred to the tabernacle. The next day, the host was removed from the water contained in the vessel and placed on a corporal inside the tabernacle. On January 7th, 2009, a sample of the host was examined. So that was the time. They were waiting. The commission noted again, let's see. I just want to read the part they put. They again noted that it was type AB. They noted that it was living. They noted that it looked like it had been damaged tissue. Some signs that can correspond to the contraction nodes have been observed on several of the sections of the fibers, the fibrous stuff that you could see. Let me move the slide. Okay. They did an analysis with an electron microscope. The outlines of the communicating junctions and the thin filaments of the microfibrils were visible. The cardiac tissue, though, in this case, was joined to the consecrated host in an inseparable way. The professors discovered other unexplainable elements. The host remained in the water for a long time, and it remained on the corporal for even longer. There was no self-destruction by the action of the intracellular enzymes like would occur if it weren't living. Although slightly changed after being removed from the water, it simply had dried. There was no change in appearance, despite not having been preserved or stabilized. They even tested it for the Serratia marcescens bacterium when they were accused of that. They were even accused by rationalists in Poland, accused them of murdering a man. The professors the professors at the university who did the study reacted and said, "We reacted with profound indignation that the public opinion was led into error by false pseudoscientific hypotheses on the analyzed phenomenon." The people were saying you have a murdered man there without having access to the material, access to the data, which I wanted. They were just making accusations. They would rather call it murder than a miracle. But the data spoke for itself. And they were later accused also, so they had to answer several accusations. They were accused of strangers intervening, that strangers put blood, okay, so maybe it is really human muscle tissue, but somebody put it there. They said it's not possible that someone had placed a fragment of a human body in the tabernacle. Why? Because the fragments which composed the host were tightly interconnected to the fibers of the human tissue. They penetrated each other as if a fragment of bread had suddenly transformed itself into body. So there was bread and body intertwined. The thing I worked on as a chemist was self-assembly, and I know you can't do that at the molecular level easily. That's one reason biology is so fascinating, because things do self-organize. But to make something self-organized like that, you can't do it. And they were accusing them of doing it during an analysis. You really can't do that during an analysis. You're just probing and looking at stuff. You're not doing stuff. They said even NASA scientists who have at their disposal the most modern analytical techniques would not be able to artificially recreate such a thing. So, those are the miracles. Those are some of the miracles that are in this book that I have. And there's the sample. This all comes from a website that is put online so that people can use these in parishes. You could blow up all of these images into big displays. I kind of think that's probably not as effective as talking about it, because you've got to stand there and read all of this, and some of it's pretty tedious. I think that's one reason it's not communicated very much. This boy, Carlos Acutis, died at 15 of leukemia, but he devoted his life very enthusiastically to communicating this message. And he's been venerated. But one of the points he made, and one of the points they make in the Real Presence website, is our faith is not founded on Eucharistic miracles in the sense that something happens with the electrons that's not supposed to happen. Our faith is founded on the Eucharist. But I know I will never, I'm a convert, and for a long time I thought I was going to pass out every time I saw the consecration, because I couldn't believe it. And I went to daily Mass every day because I said, to my husband, if there's a miracle happening 10 minutes from our house, we would be there, right, if we knew. So we have to go to Mass every day. And we did for a long time, and we still try to, although I understand now that it's okay if you don't go every day. But I was very excited about it. Over time, I started just like, yeah, kneel, yeah, walk, yeah, kneel, stick your tongue out, do the thing, go back and pray. It just sort of became routine. And I know I won't ever, that was a jump start to my faith. And I hope it is for you too. Because the most literal thing, Father Stanley Yaki, whose work I studied, said this: if Catholics would just grasp the meaning and significance of that little word is. This is my body. Christ said it, that means it's true. And that's all we needed to know. All right, I was trying to keep up with how things happened to get me to today. Next, Dr. Paniagua himself is going to say a few words. He's an interventional cardiologist at Christus Trinity Cardiology here in Tyler. I'm sure many of you already know that. He practices cardiology within the principles of the Catholic faith, and he says so all the time. At Christus Trinity Mother Frances Health System, he's a member of the Pastoral Care Advisory Committee, the Ethical Committee, and the People and Culture Committee. He's also director of the Acute Myocardial Infarction Program. Dr. Paniagua is also a fellow of the American College of Cardiology, member of the Catholic Medical Association, Texas Medical Association, and Smith County Medical Society. In 2017, he was awarded the Christus Trinity Mother Frances Health System Excellence in Patient Care Award. Dr. Paniagua is a husband and father, and the person who inspired me to an interest in Eucharistic miracles. Please welcome Dr. Oscar Paniagua.
I'm not a good public speaker, so I'm going to say just a few words. Number one, I think, like Stacy said, this is something completely unexpected. I did not expect to be here tonight and be invited by Stacy. I think the whole thing started, I'll tell you how it started. One of our children was at Mass and was not paying attention. Especially during the Eucharist consecration. The Eucharist, that's where it started. Huh? So when she went home, when that children of mine went home, then the mom said, well, as a consequence, you need to look at this video. And my wife looked online and found this video, the video that talks about the Argentinian miracle. I'm originally from Argentina, so I moved to the United States later in life. So I heard about that miracle in the 96, but it was never a big deal. And at that time, the current Pope was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, Pope Francis, Mario Bergoglio. And then I started, once a year I try to do some personal retreat because I'm a lost cause in many ways to God, so I need to go and get something. Otherwise, I just don't nourish my faith. And my life is very busy, so I don't have time sometimes to have time with God alone. And I try to do these retreats once a year if I can. So I went to this retreat, and the main topic that priest preached, that was like 6 months ago, was John chapter 6, about the Eucharist. So that was in my mind all this time. So I bought a couple of books and put it in the bag. I'm interested. I read some books sometimes when I have free time. And so that was in the back of my mind. So when I look at the video, one of my children gave me, I was very, very touched by that video because the host that this priest found in 1996 was a host that a lady in the parish found in the church on the ground. So she picked it up. So number one, caught my attention and say that we are kind of forgetting about the Eucharist. We're not paying attention to the Eucharist anymore. That was exactly what happened in my own family. We're just not paying attention to it anymore. And then the Eucharist, was put in water and then transformed into flesh, and then it was analyzed, like Stacy mentioned, and the analysis showed that the biopsy came from a left ventricle, which is the ventricle of the heart, that pushes blood to the whole body, that keep us alive, basically. And it has some white cells. When you have white cells, that means that the heart is inflamed and is actively dying. So it's not a dead tissue. You cannot find white blood cells in a cadaver, in the heart muscle, even from a cadaver. So it's a dying tissue. And to me, and that was analyzed 3 years after the fact, and it was analyzed blindly in the United States, in New York. So for me, who happened to be a cardiologist, that was like, man, this is something. And so that was, to me, was very, very touching to me. So because the video was so well done, we didn't show the video, but it's available online. So I sent that to the bishop because the bishop was started to preach a little bit about the Eucharist. So we were kind of all in the same wavelength. And I didn't know about the bishop connection with the pathologists in Australia and all that. That was completely unknown. So I sent it to him. And then I got an email from Stacy that said, hey, we're putting together a Miracles talk. She said, would you mind to join me? And then the whole talk came together like this, you know. So going a little bit deeper, what does it mean? Like Stacy says, you know, to me, I do not believe because of miracles. We shouldn't. However, when Christ, if you read the chapter 6 of John, and I encourage you to do that if you can, chapter 6, John chapter 6. It begins with the miracle of the bread, the multiplication of bread, okay, the 5,000 loaves of bread. That was a gigantic miracle. Can you imagine that you get all of a sudden feeding 5,000 people? That was a huge miracle. That's the beginning of chapter 6. Then it goes, you know, later on to the fishing in the lake where Jesus walked on the water. That's the second part of chapter 6. That's another gigantic miracle. I mean, the apostles saw him. They wanted to make him king right there. When Jesus, we need to make him king. You know, he's awesome. All this, and then after that, when they get to the coast, that's when he does the Eucharistic discourse. He starts talking about, if you don't eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood, I abide in him and he abides in me. He's talking about that, and which is in the context of the Passover, okay? And this is 1 year before he was crucified. 1 year before. Judas was there, okay? And at the end of chapter 6 is when Judas decides to betray him. At the end of chapter 6, okay? So they were, the first one to go away are the Jews at the beginning of the chapter 6 in the Eucharistic discourse. They said, well, this is kind of tough to believe, you know. So the Jews are the first one that said, this is not the real Passover. This guy's kind of crazy. So they start not believing here. Then the disciples are the one that said, you know, many of the disciples start murmuring and start doubting about Christ, who he was. So he started talking about eating his flesh and drinking his blood. And that's when the disciples, the closest friends to him, start doubting. The doubt of the disciples. And one of them makes the decision at that time to betray him. That was Judas. Just read carefully that chapter 6. It has a lot of, and this is just some ideas. I'm sure you'll find many more. But the main thing that Jesus highlights in the discourse of the bread is that you need to believe first. The belief is first, so you can have life in you. So if we don't have belief in Jesus and his teaching, then we don't have life in us, because if we don't believe that he is who he is and he's given up his blood in this gigantic miracle that's the Eucharist, we can't receive him. And then either, you know, and then that's the part that Peter says, you know, only you have words of eternal life. That's another piece of where are we going to go? You know, you are the only one. Peter didn't say, oh, hey, my friends, this is the guy that gives all the bread to everybody, walk on the water. He said, you have words of eternal life. So that's something more deeper inside of us that attracts us to Jesus, you know. So I think the message for me is like, just believe in Christ and in the Eucharist. He's really present there. And the miracles, you know, all these miracles that Stacy showed, where Jesus did it himself with the apostles. And there's still one that betrayed him. Okay, I always say there's about 12% chances that your close friend, you know, one of them will betray you. No, 8%, and there were 12. So 8% chance somebody will betray you. Okay, very close. So that's one of the things, you know. The same with the lepers, you know. He cured 10 lepers. How many lepers came back to say thank you? Well, there's 90% chance in your life that people are not going to be grateful to you. 90% chance. You know? So anyway, that's what I took from all this, So it's just to recover that faith in the Eucharist and in Christ Himself, and to believe in Him. Believe is what opens, I think, like to Peter and the apostles, it opens the doors to be able to receive Him and be nourished. There are some people that wrote some books there, and they say that the same way that we eat food, none of us, and Stacy as a chemist, when you get food in your body, you don't realize how these molecules are dissolved and they go to your heart, your muscle, and you grow. The kids grow. You don't even realize they're eating, but they grow because they eat, right? Or it's the same thing with our soul. We may not even notice, but the more frequent you go to Mass, the more frequent you receive God, somehow God will work in you, He has work on me, still have a lot of work to do, but some, but that's my experience, and I thank you very much for Stacy for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.